Hey everyone, this is JM and Evan of the Exploring Glorantha YouTube show, and we have a very special show for today. This is going to be outside of our normal sequence. We are here with Rick Meints of Chaosium, and we're going to get to talk with him about Glorantha and ducks, which I'm very excited about, and ducks and other things, but I'm really excited about ducks. So Evan, how are you doing this morning?
Good.
Excellent.
Glad to be here and honored to have Rick on.
Yes, Rick, thanks for, well, thanks for reaching out. It was great to just get some time to hang out and chat with you. And I think I mentioned that you sent me the Gloranthan Classic that I was missing, the Pavison Bay Rubble, and I have been pouring through it. I'm so excited. So thank you. Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone who watches the show and who may not know who you are?
Hello, everyone. My name is Rick Meints. I'm the third president of Chaosium, and I've been with the company for a little over 6.5 years now. And like many of you, I got into Glorantha at that golden age back in the late 70s, early 80s. And here I am today, happy to talk with both of you. And yeah, it was great that I was able to help you fill a gap in your collection.
Yeah,
I'm a bit of a collector myself, and so it's always nice to see everything in a series for a certain book.
Yes, my wife jokes that every time I go to, so we live in Texas now, and half-price books are a huge thing. And every time I find something, it doesn't matter, that will fit my collection. She's like, "Oh, you wore your collector's pants today." I'm like, "Yeah, they're deep in my jeans because I just can't. If I start collecting something, I can't not. I want the whole thing. Just not to have it, but just so that itch in the back of my head goes away."
Totally relate.
Yeah. Now, for those of our viewers who may not know, so there's Chaosium Con that is coming up soon.
Early April.
And there will be
in Ann Arbor, Michigan, right up the road from where I live.
And there will be a collector's sort of auction room kind of thing going on, right?
Well, we'll have our usual Chaosium stall, or as I'm calling it, I'm going to create a great market for that.
Yes.
Us and a few of our licensees are going to be there with a lot of cool things. Also, a lot of things that we don't normally sell, because one of the curses / gifts that I have is that I'm the keeper of the archives. And that includes a lot of extra copies, things that have gone out of print for quite some time. And I'm kind of tired of having 5 of this on the shelf and 6 of that on the shelf. It's better they go to somebody else's collection. And so, yes, we'll have a collectibles auction where there'll be a number of very rare things that we'll be auctioning, but also in the Chaosium stall itself, we're going to have a lot of my spare copies. Just, I want them to go home with somebody else instead of back home with me after all these years. Some have been sitting down in the basement for 20 years, and that's about 19.5 years too long.
Well, I am hoarding all of my disposable income for the next couple of months and looking forward to that. Well, Evan, why don't you start us off with this interview? We had a great pre-interview with you, Rick, where we just talked about a lot of things behind the scenes, and we're very excited to be able to share a lot of this information out with our fans. So, Evan, take it away.
Yeah. All right. Well, as you know, our show is about exploring Glorantha, the title, but and for this interview, I mean, you have a wide view on obviously the business of Glorantha, but we want to approach it from the point of view of you as the fan of Glorantha, which is where we all started. And so one of the things that we noted in doing our research and talking to you is that you've done some work and exploration of the Upland Marsh, which is a very particular and interesting place in Dragon Pass, and of course is associated with one of the most fascinating and some would say controversial aspects of Glorantha, and that's the ducks. And so we'd love to hear you
love
talk
them or hate
about,
them.
And I think JM and I are both in the firmly love column, and so
when I was first getting into it, I was like, ducks? Really? And then you find out they're like, priests of Humoct, and I'm like, oh, so they're like murder mallards. Okay, I am. I mean, not murder, but like they're
Well,
way
the rune
cooler.
lords more than
Yeah,
priests.
yeah,
I take your
exactly.
point.
Yeah,
The ducks. I didn't really encounter ducks right away when I started playing in Glorantha. My game master Tim Webster and his brother Tom and my friend Brian, we had played a number of games, and then Tim brought home that 2-inch box of RuneQuest, and he's like, I want to try a different fantasy game other than D&D. And ducks aren't really a big part of that box set. I mean, yes, there's Quack John in Gringle's Pawn Shop, Apple Lane, but it's not like there's a duck on the cover. It's not like there's a huge section on ducks. They're kind of the 1% of the game, if that. And so we didn't really encounter them right away until later on. But still, there's so many great things to talk about Glorantha that ducks are one of my favorites. And how much time do we have? I'm happy to talk all day about.
Go for it.
And we'll be happy to point people to things like your out of the suitcase posts. You have one on ducks, which was about the origins, both the artistic, the sort of conceptual origins, and that's great. I should say for the viewers, if you're not familiar with Rick's out of the suitcase posts that come up on the Chaosium blog and get posted on Facebook, they are a unique insight to the creative and commercial development of so many things that we love from Chaosium.
Yeah, I think with ducks, for me, it all began with the William Church maps in the RuneQuest rulebook, because, well, I had to have them close by so I could talk about them, if that's okay.
Please.
Yes,
well,
that's totally fine.
Now, I happen to have the advantage of having the original map as hand-drawn by William Church, and this is the one with the Letraset letters on it. And, of course, on the map is the Upland Marsh, one of my all-time favorite Gloranthan places, if not my favorite Gloranthan place. And there's a little place on the map, Duck Point. And that's where I remember asking Tim, what's up with Duck Point? And he's like, well, if you want to find out, go there. And so we had an adventure to Duck Point, and that's where we got to meet some ducks. And Tim, thankfully, played them fairly straight in terms of he didn't do a Donald Duck voice. He didn't have everything, be cream pies in your face or Looney Tunes type of Daffy Duck. I don't mind any of that to a limited extent, but at my gaming table, or the gaming tables I've been at, it's always been a fairly lighthearted, but by no means silly experience when it comes to ducks. And so that's when, we encountered ducks for the first time. We started, getting very scared of the undead coming out of the Upland Marsh. And we realized that the ducks were mainly guardians, keeping the Upland Marsh at bay. And so that's where it all began for me. Although,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, as a side note, I was into Carl Barks and Uncle Scrooge comics since as early as I can remember, going back to, in my grandmother's house up in the classic attic. There was a huge stack of my father's comic books, including Uncle Scrooge and some Disney comics. And so I started reading those Disney comics and Uncle Scrooge comics, like I said, as far back as I can remember. And I actually got my father's collection of Uncle Scrooge comics.
Oh, that's awesome.
Lo and behold, when I was chatting with Greg Stafford one time, he mentioned that he was a huge Carl Barks fan. And that's where he was happy to, base ducks on, Howard the Duck and Uncle Scrooge, not Daffy or Donald.
That's awesome. And I was just going to say, what a great way for a GM to engage players in Glorantha and Dragon Pass by saying, oh, you think that's interesting? Well, I'm not going to tell you what's there. You actually have to go journey there, and then you can find out. I love that approach.
Yeah, well, we were from further north than that, because our first big campaign was actually in Balazar as part of Griffin Mountain. And so, we had access to the RuneQuest rulebook because we were playing the game, and you'd look things up, and of course you'd see the map and things like that. But since we weren't from there, he's like, well, you'd have to journey there to go there. And so that was part of our adventures after Griffin Mountain, is when we went down to, Dragon Pass and visited Duck Point and then the Upland Marsh and a number of other places like Bold Home and our journey began, and we just discovered these things one at a time as we encountered them, not just read up on everything ahead of time.
Well,
Of course,
and
there
I think
wasn't
that
much to read up on back in 1981.
Right.
It was a much shorter list of materials, so it wasn't like you had the Guide to Glorantha or huge books on, Pavis and Big Rebel box sets hadn't come out yet. Borderlands hadn't come out yet, so a lot of the classics just hadn't been written yet.
and I think the takeaway always from Glorantha, from the point of view of the mythology, but even to the experience of the world, is that it is made richer and real by the experience of it. It's not just reading it. It's not just having it in a big encyclopedia. Although I love the big encyclopedia.
Agreed.
But I love the big encyclopedia because it makes me want to go back and put those things into my games, and give them to people for them to experience and have their own understanding of it, because we did it. We went there. We saw this thing. We met this person.
Absolutely. It was one of the things that really made Glorantha, one of my favorites, was that when we were playing in Griffin Mountain, not only did we meet things like Jacko-bears, but we also made it to Gonorda's castle. And that was in the 11 giant mountains. And the fact that Glorantha has places where giants get old enough and large enough and eventually just sit down and don't get up again and become a mountain. And that's how some of the greatest mountains in Glorantha got made. It's those kind of life becomes myth, becomes reality, those kind of stories that you can pass on. That's where the hook got set deep when it came to me loving Glorantha.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, you mentioned Dilecti. Do you want to give our fans kind of an overview of kind of who Dilecti is and kind of the relationship that the ducks have with this necromancer?
Well, there are different theories.
Okay.
And that's one of the other great things about Glorantha is that the canon is not so absolute. And in many respects, we don't even like to use the word canon. We just prefer that these are the myths and the stories and the foundations of Glorantha, which can change over time. And so there are a lot of great mysteries that people don't have the absolute answer, because if you have the absolute answer, then there's no real speculation. Oh, those things are all wrong. This is the real answer. Let's move on. And so Dilecti is shrouded in mystery. Exactly how he created the Marsh is kind of surrounded in mystery. And I was very fortunate that when I was working on Tales of the Reaching Moon back in the 90s, we decided to do an Upland Marsh issue. And that's when I really started doing a little bit of my research into the history and background of it. And I was able to work with both Sandy Peterson and Greg Stafford, and we had a lot of conversations. They didn't tell me, oh, here's what you have to say. We just started having talks and chats about how we thought things might work in general. And so, Dilecti is one of those holdouts from the Empire of Worms Friends, which I love the name of that empire, Empire of the Worms Friends. Were they really friendly? Kind of went bad at the end there. So, with the great dragon kill. So how friendly was it? But the Empire of Worms Friends was full of mystics and magicians and sorcerers. That's where Dilecti got a lot of his power during that time. And he was able, through his draconic connections, to also get a hint that it was all going to fall apart very soon. And so he made the Marsh to protect himself from all the dangers he thought were inevitably imminent. And he was right, because the dragon kill was only a very short time away after that, where dragons actually ate basically everybody in the whole region. That's why it's called Dragon Pass. And
I love that story.
There's so many large dragons there. They kind of sleep in mountains and trees and all that grow over them and things like that. But enough of them woke up and just basically ate the Great Golden Horde, the big army of the Empire of Worms Friends and everybody else. So they almost exterminated everybody to the last person, at least all the humans, because they were the ones messing with the draconic powers so much, not the elder races, but the humans, that he wanted to survive that. And he did, by creating the Marsh, where it protect him by everything that flew in the air, everything that walked on the ground, and everything that, swam in the water. But the ducks didn't really fit into any one of those categories as part of the protection, because they really weren't of the air. They didn't really fly anymore. They've been cursed by Yelm and lost their powers of flight. they could swim, but they weren't, you know, like sea creatures, and they didn't truly walk on the ground like everybody else. You know, they're kind of in-betweeners, and so they're largely immune to most of the protections of the upland marsh, where, at least from what I was writing, if they freeze, the undead can't see them. And so they can basically get around the marsh unlike anybody else. And they're, of course, they're very suited to a marsh wetlands, you know, environment. And so they're basically the ideal nemesis for Dilecti, despite all his preparations.
I love how essentially the ducks end up being kind of the remainder that's left over after he casts this massive ritual, and therefore they're able to sneak in, and it doesn't affect them. I love that idea on so many levels, and I don't know why that's sort of the first time kind of hearing you put all of that together, that it's like all of the gears are clicking in my head, and now I want to run a campaign set in Duck Point.
Well, you happen to choose one of the very, very few, if only, topics I've ever actually written an article on, or a small series of articles on. I was the layout guy for Tales of the Reaching Moon, and I really liked that. And I helped organize the Convulsion Convention up in Leicester, which is now called Continuum. And, you know, this was back in the 90s. And so when it came to writing, I didn't have a lot of confidence in a lot of topics, just because, like a lot of people, very, very intimidating, a lot of topics. Mm-hmm. They don't have to be that way, but a lot of people can intimidate themselves into thinking, oh, I could never write about Malkianism, or I could never write about, you know, Pameltella, or, you know, name a wide variety of topics. But the Marsh was something I for whatever reason, I felt comfortable talking and writing about. And like I said, I was very fortunate that Sandy Peterson and Greg Stafford are friends of mine, and they were happy to share their thoughts on it. And Greg even sent me some stuff from the archives, some typewritten pages he had done back in the late 70s and early 80s. And, you know, I built on those things. And so, yeah, Tales 19 and 20, that's my only published material. That, and I wrote an article on beer brewing.
And some of that rolled over, just for the people, again, for our own collectors who are watching. Unfortunately, those tales of the Reaching Moon are hard to come by nowadays. But a lot of that material shows back up in something that's still currently available in PDF, the Worms Footnotes 5, I believe.
Worms Footnotes 15.
Or 15, sorry.
The one that we did about a decade,
right.
2 decades after the magazine stopped.
Right.
Yeah, we some of my material ended up in that as well, just because we had a lot of requests, and because it was written by me, I knew we had permission to use it. And so, sadly, a lot of the 20 issues of Tales of the Reaching Moon, that material's largely out of print. I won't say it's going to stay out of print forever, because there are some talk and efforts of possibly doing something with that material. I'm not promising anything, but a lot of the people involved in that are still around. They're interested in doing something with it, and so watch this space.
Yeah. No, well, we see plenty of them. You know, have plenty of them took over Chaosium, sort of, are providing, are renewing and expanding it. And I'm sure we're going to reach talking about some of that when we talk about the Johnstown Compendium. But just getting to hear about, I think the people who love Glorantha do feel some of that intimidation. We're hoping with this show to allow people to feel like it can be comfortable to, even if they don't grab a grand sweep of it, but to find their own upland marsh or their corner of Glorantha that they want to make theirs. So hearing you talk about it is great.
So Evan, I got a question. So because you kind of set us up for this. So exploring Glorantha is about, as you said, kind of removing the intimidation barrier for players and GMs to get into this wonderful setting that is very unique in both the RPG and I would say, kind of the fantasy genre. So at the end of all of our episodes, we try and boil down, hey, we've just talked about we talked about elves for an hour. What does this mean for players and GMs? What is cool about including elves in your game or playing as an elf in Glorantha? So before we kind of move away from the topic of the Upland Marsh and the ducks and Dilecti, like, can you give just a quick, if you had to say for players, here's why playing a duck would be awesome, and for GMs, here's why using the duck or ducks or the Upland Marsh, this is why you should, like, in your opinion, this is why you should include this in your game.
Well, I think playing a duck is a tremendous opportunity to prove everybody right or wrong with their prejudices about ducks. Because if you play them in a lighthearted but relatively serious way, where the ducks have a culture, they have their beliefs, they have their prejudices, they have their foibles, they have their shortcomings, but they also contribute and they're regular quote unquote people too. You can show people that it's not just a Daffy Duck impression or a Donald Duck impression. Of course, you also have the opportunity to do exactly that and cement it all the more. But most of the people I've played with have showed ducks in that lighthearted manner. And it's really opened a lot of people's eyes as what Glorantha can do with taking other creatures and races and making them very playable, be it like with trolls and Troll Pack made trolls very playable in their own unique niche. You know, everything driven by their appetites and tastes and, you know, senses, or whether you're playing, you know, a satyr or you're playing, you know, even an elf or a dwarf or those creatures, you can have them have a unique approach to role playing, which to me just adds to the story. And to me, it's all about the story.
Yeah.
If that answers your question.
I think it does.
Absolutely. Yeah.
One of the things I loved about Rob and Jonathan's take for 13th Age Glorantha was the fact that you got to choose if you played a duck, you got to choose which of those two stereotypes am I leaning into. Am I leaning into the silly stereotype? I'm going to pick this ability. If I'm going to lean into more of the serious stereotype, I'll take this ability. But Evan, you want to bring up Issaries?
I do. Well, I watched a long and excellent interview between Rick and John Wick, the who has brought Seventh Sea to Chaosium and continues to be a deep thinker on all sorts of RPG matters, and has jumped into his own corner of Glorantha to learn about it and make it his own. But one of the things that impressed me was you pulled out of your suitcase there your childhood huge character sheet for playing an Issaries worshiper, and it was very clear that Issaries was one of the but it was one of the
That's amazing.
Cut and paste.
Wonderful.
Yep.
I
didn't know you were going to ask about
still
that,
have those sheets.
I just happened to have it handy.
Yeah, well, kismet. Anyway, what about Issaries attracts you as a player, or attracted you when you were Issaries is we've talked about him on the show. He's one of the 7 Lightbringers.
Mm-hmm.
He's the talking god. He accompanied Orlanth and helped find the pathway down through the underworld and everything. And he plays an important in the world of Glorantha and in communication, travel, etc. But what is it that attracts you? Why should someone pick to be a follower of Issaries? Pick off out of the starter set, pick up Harmast and play him instead of Asana or the Wolf Killer guy, or the more heroic, like they're going to go and chop Dilecti's zombies heads off and things like that. Why in Issaries?
Well, maybe you've heard the phrase that a lot of actors make a career out of basically playing themselves in every movie. One of the things is my personality, for whatever it's worth, pretty much is as an Issaries merchant. And it's just part of my personality. I like to travel. And of course, Issaries is a great way to travel and see the world. You have a lot of protective magics, be it Path Watch or other things like that. And so between Issaries making travel a little bit easier, and also I'm a power gamer. And one of the things was getting rid of all the loot. And Issaries is great at selling loot. They can get a good price with their I had a high bargain roll and a percentage skill. And so I could always get an extra 100 for this set of armor or an extra 50 for this weapon. And that does add up. And so I was able to afford more training or other things and be able to bargain for better magic items when they very rarely came up, because ours was not a particularly magic rich campaign. And so I like the trading aspect of it. And it's also what I really like about, my Chaosium job is I love working in the Chaosium booth. And it's kind of nice that if anybody walks up, everybody on the booth staff, if they hear somebody say, well, can you give me a discount? They're like, you got to go talk to Rick. And so I'm like, all right, let's start bargaining. And, it was just one such incident when I was in the Chaosium booth where Greg Stafford was watching me. And when it came to a lull in the action and between customers and all that, he kind of walks over and was like, Rick, you really are an Issaries merchant. And I was just like, thank you, Greg. That's about one of the greatest compliments you could give me. And so I also, in our campaign, languages were pretty important. And Issaries was a little bit better at learning languages as one of the light bringers and all that. And so when you added up those kind of things that just kind of fit my personality, I've probably played an Issaries merchant in a majority of my Gloranthan games, if possible. Even when I was playing HeroQuest recently in a Zoom campaign for a number of sessions, I was an Issaries merchant. And I still enjoy it. And it just works for me. And it's a niche. A lot of people kind of look at me like, you want to play a guy that just cares about that? He can't, they don't even like to use swords. They use staves. And I'm like, I got a pretty cool staff. We went up to the, Griffin Mountain, and we were able to get a few limbs off a windberry tree. And I was able to make one into a staff of telekinesis. And that's pretty cool.
That's pretty awesome.
And so that is awesome.
It wasn't just a regular quarter staff. It was a little bit more than that. Or as the joke would be, $1.25 quarter staff.
I feel like you just answered my follow-up question, which is why would playing an Issaries priest be awesome? And I think you just sold it.
Well, I've really enjoyed it. I mean, it's not the only character I've played. I've played, a number of other, be it a Humakti or things like that. And I've enjoyed all that as well. But with Issaries, I just enjoyed it the most. It was also the first character I played. And so got used to a lot of that. And once you know a little bit more about the mythology, that's the other nice thing, is if you know a little bit of the mythology of the god you're associated with, you can just kind of throw it in casually in conversation. Well, we all know that Issaries was a great path maker. And so I'm going to, especially in one shots, like with HeroQuest campaigns, where you're just doing, I should say scenarios, where you can throw things in like that, and it just makes the story all the richer.
Right.
And it's not just, I'm going to hit him with my axe.
Well, and I think it really helped, of course, that in Cults of Prax, your point of view character, the person coming from the outside, that was then allowing you to not only have the explanation of the cult descriptions, but actually in the fiction, the person experiencing all of these unusual cult practices and cultural experiences is Baturian Varash, the Issaries priest and merchant. And seeing, I don't think anything opened me up to what life in Glorantha was like when I first started back in the 80s than reading those little fictional vignettes about Baturian's travels.
Oh yeah, no, one of the first supplements Tim got when he brought that RuneQuest to the game table was Cults of Prax. And RuneQuest, the box set, really gave you a rule set and a scenario, which is great. Cults of Prax gave you the world of Glorantha in terms of something you could read about. And I loved all those travels of Baturian Varash. And I probably read those, multiple times just because they are such a good read and such a great example with all kinds of things that never really get explained in detail, but just make you curious about things.
Yeah.
And I was lucky. I got to ask Greg about some of those because he wrote the Travels of Baturian Barrage for the most part for Cults of Prax. That was his big contribution to it, compared to Steve Perrin did a lot of the mechanics and the spells and things like that, which are also great. And so I would ask him, what are these gnarl flowers and why do they sing to them and all that? And he was like, I don't know. He just put them in there because they were cool. And he's like, well, maybe somebody will make a myth up about that someday or make up a story about it. And there are a lot of things in Glorantha, from not only the Travels of Baturian Barrage or the Journeys of Paulus Longveil and Cults of Terror, but there are lots of things in a lot of the works that, other than that one sentence, that's basically all anybody really knows. And that's all that ever got documented. But there's so many wonderful things you can then expand upon if you want to.
Yeah, my sense from even with the very detailed things that we have now, many decades into our love affair with Glorantha and the guide to Glorantha, which thank you very much for helping to spearhead that. But every entry there is raises more questions than it answers and gives at least one, if not a dozen, adventure hooks that just pull right into my imagination. And I think there is a little bit of a more challenging investment sometimes to get into Glorantha. Maybe it's just an intimidation factor, because you can always just get in and play, but you feel like, oh, there's so much there. But once you get over that, then you start to see the connections and things just start to, I think, flow together with the logic of the world and all of the creators sort of feeding into it. And that has carried through, from Greg Stafford's original, starting to, explore it as in writings initially, and then bringing in so many people, Sandy and Jeff and all of the original Chaosium folks, and just it's why we do this show. It's because it's just fascinating.
Sure. Well, the Guide to Glorantha project was a wonderful project. Fond memories of it. It's hard to believe it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it seems like yesterday, and yesterday was such a wonderful day. And so, with the Guide to Glorantha, I have a very different reading experience than a lot of people would for the Guide to Glorantha, because, our overarching goal was to take all the lore and geography and history and politics and distill all those, decades of material into, turns out 2 volumes of work, 800 pages. And so we wanted to get it done as quickly as possible. And so we decided to take a little bit of a different approach, which was a little bit modular, which is just, Jeff kind of started with chapter 1, section 1, and worked with Greg and Sandy and whatever other experts and people that had the most information on that topic, and wrote that up, passed it over to me for layout when we had the art and maps and that for just that one section. And like Colin Driver, who did the whole cartography for the whole world.
Yeah.
It wasn't like he did the whole map. We basically kind of like, well, we'll start here and fill this in for this section of the book, and then I'll work on this section next and this section next. And it was all built kind of in sequence. And so I was usually given sometimes as little as 2 pages, sometimes as many as 30 pages. And of course, one of the reasons it took me a while to do the layout is I basically devoured and read all those pages as I was laying out. I was like, I'd stop, read the description for a second. I'm like, that's what that is? Or I would read about a culture. I never thought they were like that. And so it took me a lot longer to do the layout because I was reading all these things, page by page, little section by little section, not just, here's the whole big text file. You can start on the 800 pages of layout now. Right. And so my reading experience, as I said, is a little bit different than a lot of people's. And that's really what I would recommend about the Guide to Glorantha. is it's really not a novel you read
Mm-mm.
starting on page 1 to page 800. Pick a topic, pick an area, read a few pages on that, try to use it in your game or your stories or your writing, and go from there. I that's how I enjoyed it the most, as opposed to just like reading dozens and dozens of pages. That's like drinking from a fire hose. And I personally, that's not my approach.
It is, and there have been a couple of read the guide alongs, if you will, on several different forums that I have been a part
Mhm.
of, and they're fun, but they're not as useful as just going, listen, what's this? What's the kingdom of ignorance? Let me figure out if that's a place I wanna dig down into.
I got to stop you there. I'm
Okay.
not big on pronunciations, but one time we were at a seminar in Germany at the Tentacles Convention, which is a wonderful convention because it's in a real castle on the Rhine and all that. But one of the people in the audience was asking questions of Greg and Sandy, and he said, "Can I ask you about the kingdom of ignorance?" He was French, and
Yeah.
I'm not
Sure.
And so, and Greg kind of stopped and looked at Sandy, and they said, "Ignorance?" And we're like, "We now know how to pronounce the kingdom of ignorance." And they weren't making fun of the French.
Yeah,
Just,
no.
wait, but ignorance, but ignorance. And
Ignorance.
so I just had to pass that on.
That's
I'm big
awesome.
on pronunciation for a lot of things, but that one, that was just one of those magic moments with
Oh,
Glorantha
yeah.
where it just got defined totally, by chance.
Well, and I think that's
You heard it
something
here, folks.
that's something interesting about. I mean, it always happens in games, right? I was having a great discussion with a friend of mine, and right, the rules and the world are static until they hit the table, and it's the relationships that you build with the characters and the world and the stories that actually make gaming interesting and unique. But Greg took that a step further, I feel like, and there were the relationships between the fans and Greg and the fans and Chaosium. Because kind of I'll use that as my segue into the next section, because for a long time we had a period of time in the Gloranthan continuity where it wasn't, nothing was being done with it. And then we had the Tales of the Reaching Moon and the Gloranthan Renaissance. And Glorantha has burned in my heart for a long time. And in talking with Evan, it really feels like for the longest time, it existed because the fans kept the torch and kept passing it to other people and did these things like the Gloranthan Renaissance and Tales of the Reaching Moon that eventually became Moon Design and, now Chaosium, and that is history. So can you tell us a little bit of what it was like to be part of the fan community in the days of the Renaissance with the Tales of the Reaching Moon? And then we'll talk about the Johnstown Compendium and maybe how that's a link to a link to the past and the future of the Gloranthan fan community. But let's start with that time period and how did Tales come about? What was your involvement with that? And how did the fans keep this world alive? I feel like they were doing hero quests to just keep the world turning, if you will.
Yeah, no, there were, it was a wonderful time, and I got in it at a great time. And so I think back to when I first played RuneQuest and Glorantha, which in the very early 80s didn't last that long because my game master Tim, about 6 months after we were playing through Griffin Mountain, he brought a little box supplement called Call of Cthulhu home in the 2-inch box. And he's like, we like the rules of RuneQuest. Let's try it with one of his favorite authors, H.P. Lovecraft. And I had never read any H.P. Lovecraft. I'd seen it on the bookshelf in Tim's bedroom, but he said, let's try some horror role playing. And I'm like, well, I like the Upland Marsh and I like the horror with the skeletons and zombies and that kind of stuff. So sure, we'll try Call of Cthulhu. And so we played that until Tim's brother Tom brought home the 2-inch box of Stormbringer. And then we started playing through that and gave up on Call of Cthulhu. But then, we went off to college and I stopped playing a lot of role-playing games, at least on a regular basis, up until, I got my day job at Ford Motor Company and a little bit of extra cash, and I started backfilling a few things in my collection. And that was just around the early 90s when the RuneQuest Renaissance was just kicking off. And Avalon Hill did the fans a really big favor in the early 90s by including advertisements for the Tales of the Reaching Moon magazine inside things like Sun County and River Cradles. And so I contacted David Gadbois, like it said, to contact the US rep in Texas. And he was able to sell me the back issues of Tales that he had. And I thought it was a wonderful magazine. And of course, one of the things they were talking about in there was RuneQuest Con 1 in Baltimore in 1994. And because I hadn't been a gamer very much, you know, at least not in terms of role-playing games, certainly not RuneQuest, for a decade, and I didn't think I was going to go. But then for whatever reason, at the last minute, I just decided I'll go to the convention because I enjoyed the magazine. I enjoyed the RuneQuest Renaissance supplements. Like I said, River Cradles and Sun County by Michael O'Brien, one of my all-time favorites. And so I decided to go. And that's where I met Michael O'Brien. And I met David Hall, who did Tales of the Reaching Moon, and Nick Brook, who did Tales of the Reaching Moon articles and material. And, you know, Neil Robinson was there as well. And then, of course, I met Greg and Sandy. And that's really where I met a lot of the community, because I wasn't online that much. You know, it was the internet, of course, was a lot simpler back then, but they had, you know, the news groups with the text-based, you know, emails sending out, you know, various discussions. But meeting them in person really opened my eyes that there was this community of people who were really into Glorantha, really into having a good time, knowledgeable about it, but also very welcoming. And, you know, two things in particular about the welcoming aspect of it is that, you know, Greg Stafford, in between playing in a free form and doing seminars and things like that, I was able to corner him in the lounge in the hotel. And I had my comic book box full of my much smaller than collection of RuneQuest stuff. And I said, you know, Greg, do you have a few minutes? I'd love to get your autograph on a few of these and just ask a few questions. And for whatever reason, I guess I caught Greg at a great time, and he was happy to autograph those things. And I asked him a few questions, and we talked about things like the Upland Marsh and a little bit about the ducks and Jacko bears, which of course, one of my all-time other favorite Gloranthan creations. And you know, and he's like, you know, Rick, you got a real interest in these things. Maybe you should become, you know, one of the historians of Glorantha in terms of, you know, you got a decent library and build upon it. And he recommended a few other things I might want to add to my collection. And so that, you know, that to me, that was a real compliment that Greg said, like, you know, I had a role in just the whole Gloranthan ethos. And the other thing that happened at Glorantha Con 1 is that I was in the storytelling contest. Listening to all the different people tell stories, and one of them was by Nick Brook. And after he finished his story, he sat down next to me as he listened to other people, and we got to chat in between stories and things like that. And then he ended up just saying, well, you know, Rick, if you're ever over in Britain, you know, in the London area, please look me up and we'll go out and have dinner and stuff like that, and, you know, chat more. And, you know, that was January in '94. And as luck would have it, in December, I had a work trip over to London for Ford Motor Company, because they have a large, you know, automotive works and other things over there. And I was able to look him up, and yeah, we had dinner and we had drinks, and he introduced me to David Hall and Colin Phillips and Dan Barker, a lot of other people with Tales of the Reaching Moon. And, you know, they started becoming, you know, fast and lifelong friends. And so if I'm rambling too much,
No.
I'm happy to cut the story short.
No.
You know, I loved it so much that I went back to my boss a couple of months later, after my second trip over to the UK a month later. And I just said, I'd like to, you know, go on foreign service with the company for a couple of years in the UK, like a lot of the other people in my department were doing. Because, you know, Ford was part of globalizing the company, getting ready for Y2K and all that. And so they said, sure, you can work over there for a couple of years. And I was able to get involved because I offered up my layout skills to Tales of the Reaching Moon, and Steve Thomas wanted to step back from doing layout, so I got to start doing layout. And I just, that's how I got hooked into the community. And, you know, there was wonderful conventions, and that's where I got to get better acquainted with Greg Stafford and Sandy Peterson, because they were always invited as guests to, you know, Convulsion in the summer and then Tentacles in the spring, and of course the annual RuneQuest cons. And so that's where I just got to spend more time working on the magazine, organizing the convention, and writing a little bit myself, and getting much better acquainted and better friends with a lot of the people involved in the fan community and with Chaosium as well.
Very cool. So do you feel like that foundation of the fan community at the time when you kind of really came back to the RuneQuest Renaissance, and it sounds like a lot of the other members of Chaosium now who were Moon Design several feel old. I want to say several years ago, but it's actually been longer than that now. It's been close to. Has it been 7 or 8 years now? Like it feels like I remember being at the Gen Con when it was announced, and just
that was 2015.
Okay,
so it's coming up on 7 years.
Coming up on 7 years. Do you feel like that is one of the reasons that Chaosium has just been so supportive of things like the Johnstown Compendium and the is it the Miskatonic Repository?
Our community content programs on Drive Through RPG.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Michael O'Brien, Jeff Richard, Neil Robinson, and myself, kind of the managing partners of Chaosium. We all met in either 94 or 95, depending on which RQCon you're talking about. And, because the first one was in Baltimore, the next one was in San Francisco, and the next one was in Australia, and so on. And so we all were very active in the fan community, in publications. Jeff and Neil worked on Enclosure,
Mm-hmm.
which had volumes of that, which was kind of their fanzine. And of course, they organized the RuneQuest Con in Victoria, Canada, and that Mob and I, and along with Greg and Sandy and a lot of other people, all attended that. And so we were very active in the community. But people come and go, like Tales of the Reaching Moon. David Hall, after about 19 or 20 issues, had enough, and he was stepping back, which is why in 1999, Colin Phillips and I, who still wanted to do publishing of various things, we had made a deal with Greg to do the Glorantha Classics to get a lot of the RuneQuest 2 material back into print.
Mm-hmm.
But David was in a different place in his life and kind of wanted to take a big break. And so we set up Moon Design Publications in 1999 to start with those reprints, the Glorantha Classic,
Mm-hmm.
the first one, Pavis and Big Rebel. And that's where I kind of switched to the business side of things. And that's one of the reasons why Moon Design, working with Greg, we pretty much just started proving we could deliver on what we promised. We put out a quality product,
Mm-hmm.
and we put a fair bit of money in his pocket when unfortunately Greg wasn't earning a lot of income. When he started Issaries Inc. after he left Chaosium in 1998, pretty much started Issaries Inc. immediately thereafter, started working on getting Hero Wars ready for print and all of that. He wasn't making a lot of money. And so the Glorantha Classics put some money in his pocket. We paid in full and on time. And he saw that while we were a hobby business, we were living up to our obligations. We insisted on contracts. We paid our royalties and so on. And we just kept expanding that working relationship with Greg to where Moon Design became the licensee to publish HeroQuest on his behalf when he wanted to head down to Mexico
Mm-hmm.
and retire from publishing largely. And we just kept growing it from there. And so he saw us as businessmen, not just as fans. And that's why, when Jeff became part of Moon Design and Neil and Mob became part of Moon Design, that's because he had seen us in action for such a long time. When Chaosium was in real trouble,
Mm-hmm.
they wanted to get business people involved in it from a variety of backgrounds. And together, we were the team that they felt could turn things around at Chaosium from a businessman's point of view.
Well, as a fan of Chaosium, I would say that you have wildly succeeded.
Thank you. We've done a number of things right. We got a long list of things we still want to do better on, but we like to think we've certainly turned things around to where we're in a much better place, and we're profitable, and we're expanding, and we're growing, and producing a lot of great supplements for Call of Cthulhu, RuneQuest, 7th Sea, all of our product lines. We're growing and expanding the company, but we're also trying to be very true to the roots and the ethos that is Chaosium.
Yeah.
We still like to keep a lot of the old jokes about how we're the Chaosium, not the Ordarium, and we do things a little bit differently. And so it's great to be a part of something that I grew up with. And it's a common story that a lot of us have, is we all grew up with the company, and we're really proud and honored that we get to help the company carry on as we're approaching our 50th anniversary.
Yeah.
And so, part of that story now is through the community content programs through Drive-Through RPG, with the Johnstown Compendium being of particular interest, of course, for us, because that's the Glorantha nexus. You continue to sort of develop talent. We're seeing people who start as artists, for example, for Johnstown Compendium products, then moving into being tapped by Chaosium for official contributions and writers and creators that way. Is that sort of a more institutionalized relationship that sort of was piloted by the fan projects of the 90s for Glorantha?
It's the same kindred spirit that the community has a lot to offer, and there are a lot of things that people may want to write about or talk about that may not make a great publication that would be in every game store, but it's still an awesome thing to write up, and it can be of a small size or a large size. And because it takes a long time to develop a larger Gloranthan product. It's especially when you're writing it for the commercial market, it's got to tick a lot of boxes to be a success. A lot of research and development goes into it. It has to have a certain amount of art. A lot of things we have to be very careful with to produce a quality product. While a lot of things in the Johnstown Compendium and the Miskatonic University repository, most of those requirements, while yes, you want a quality product, you want it well written, you want some nice art and all that, it's much more up to the the creative team behind that product, be it a single person that just wants to do a 4-page thing, up to a team of people who wants to do a 200-page thing. There's room for that whole spectrum of product, and the Johnstown Compendium is a great way to do it. And we've been very fortunate that we were able to get agreement where a lot of our products, once they get to a certain sales number, can actually be printed products as well, because most community content programs on Drive-Through RPG, they don't allow print at all.
I'm actually waiting for 2 products to show. I was hoping they were going to come today, but the winter storm has. I got Company of the Dragon and Armies and Enemies of Dragon Pass print on demand in the mail for
Those
me.
are both great books. Martin Helsden with his Armies and Enemies, working with Jeff and a large variety of other people, put together a huge book showing how you can go really deep into Glorantha on particular topics. And the other books in the compendium, they just show that, like I said, the whole wealth of the range of things you can have. But actually, I've actually moved the chair from the corner here where it usually sits, because once again, I'm having to shuffle things around on the shelves, and I'm actually preparing a community content shelf where some of the things I don't tend to read quite as much are going to get taken to the secondary room in the library. And the community content shelf is, I'm trying to figure out what can go upstairs, what can go downstairs. And, because I got too many stacks of books on the floor in my office with a lot of community content stuff, just because I don't have room on the shelves yet.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, we love the community content program. It helps get more material out. And as you said, it also allows us to see what people can do and write, identify potential authors and artists that we want to work with even more, and turn them into members of the Chaosium writing team, where they could help write a supplement on name any particular topic. And a lot of people are very intimidated by writing a professional publication for Glorantha, and if this gives them an entry point that they're more comfortable with, we're all for it. Because one of the reasons that we don't have as much Chaosium RuneQuest product coming out is because we have a hard time finding authors who feel they're worthy of the task. You know, we say, hey, you're a great writer on X. Would you like to write something for Chaosium? They're like, oh, I don't think I could do that. But hopefully we'll change their mind after they see that, hey, I wrote 2 or 3 or 4 things for the Johnstown Compendium. This isn't quite as difficult and daunting as I thought. Then they're willing to try something bigger. You know, start small. And that applies to basically with anything with Glorantha. Start small, figure that out, and grow it from there. And that's what the Johnstown Compendium and the Miskatonic Repository and all our community content programs are about, is a lot of people have things to contribute. Start where you want and go from there.
I mean, I think that's at its heart the reason we started exploring Glorantha, because that's what we keep reiterating. You can start small. You don't have to have the 800 pages of the guide memorized. You don't even have to have the source book memorized. Find something small that interests you and start there and expand out. Now,
I mean, I'm very comfortable with my Glorantha lore skill being somewhere between 10 and 20%. That's okay with me. I enjoy the stories and enjoy playing in games, and I'm not the person that knows all the 8-syllable names for various gods from 100,000 years ago, but hey, I still enjoy every game I play.
No, that's more my level. Like, that's where I'm at. Evan knows all of the summoning rites and the secret 9th syllable. So, as the president of Chaosium, I know there's a lot on the docket for RuneQuest this year and in the upcoming years. Can you kind of give us an overview of some of the cool projects that are going to be coming, that we're going to be able to start seeing come down the pipe for Glorantha? I know we talked about cults and the Sartar campaign.
Yeah, you know, the slipcase set with the cults books and the Prospedia in it is the wrapping up the review and getting it into layout, and we've got graphic designers working on the look of the books, and it's looking awesome. It's a big project, which is why it's had, you know, a long development life, but we're getting there to where we want to get it, you know, to the printers this year as opposed to next year. And along with that, you know, the weapons and equipment guide is already out in PDF, and it's at the printers as we speak. You know, and after that, we have a number of books not too far behind the cult slipcase set. One in particular that's near and dear to my heart is we have an Upland Marsh campaign with Dilecti in it. And so, you know, it's just picking which of these we can get the art done in a reasonable amount of time and then get it into layout as well. But, you know, we have Robin Law's Pavis and Big Rebel set of material that's all written and going through final content editing. And so we hope to see that in the near future. And then, you know, at Impromptu Con, you know, Jeff and Jason went through a lot of other projects that it's just working to get the final bits of content editing done to get them into layout. And of course, there's always the challenge of getting all the art. Maps is not as big a problem now that we've got Matt Ryan on the team. He's such an excellent cartographer and super eager to get things done. And so you're going to see a lot more maps from Matt Ryan. And so at a teaser level, those are some of the things that are coming up.
Well, that's very exciting. And I don't know if I should prompt you, but I understand that also from having attended Impromptu Con that another exciting publication is coming out from your role as, you know, historian of things Glorantha and Chaosium, that there's a new index that is going to drop.
Well, you know, the last Meints index to Glorantha I did back in 1999. And that was the second edition because the first one came out in 1996. And it all kind of stems from me being Mr. Suitcase, which it was on the RuneQuest Daily that people were talking about out of print things and how they were hard to get. And I was commenting on what was in one of the harder to find out of print things. You know, someone had asked about, you know, well, what's in, you know, Cults of Terror or something far more obscure than that. Like what's in Cults of Light and Death by the Apprentices Guild. Oh, and I mean, well, it's got these cults in it, and like, must be nice owning all these things, and you know, you don't really share very much. All these things, you kind of like just lord your, you know, hoard of knowledge over people. And I'm like, wait a minute, because he called me Mr. Suitcase, and I'm like, I don't even know what Mr. Suitcase is, but apparently it's a Magic the Gathering term for people who have a whole suitcase full of rare Magic the Gathering cards like Black Lotus and stuff like that, and they can you know, pull out the, you know, super secret powerful cards that nobody else can get, you know. And so, like I believe with most things, embrace the term and take all the, you know, take all the hate out of it. So I'm like, I put on my signature line in my post after that, you know, Mr. Suitcase, right? I start out with Mr. Suitcase speaks about things, because I wanted to share information, not hoard information. And so as part of being Mr. Suitcase, people would say, like, what's this like, or what's that about? You know, what's in your collection that, you know, you've got a copy of it. Can you tell me if it's worth getting? And so I just started documenting all the different Gloranthan publications, RuneQuest publications, going back to 1975 with White Bear and Red Moon, the first Gloranthan publication. And, you know, back in 99, you know, you could fit out all of that into, you know, a 128-page book, just with lists and you know, pictures of the covers and things like that. Oh, I just happened to go to the Tales of the Reaching Moon section. And so, you know, you could document it all in a fairly slim volume, but you know, since it was last updated in 1999, a lot of wonderful things have come out since. And people were saying, hey, you ever going to do an updated edition of your book? Because there are a lot of collectors out there, and, you know, the internet's made it easier to get certain things on eBay or the secondary market. But people don't want to buy things. They don't really know what's in them. And so I've expanded it to where it's now a 260-page book. And it's going to be a Chaosium publication this time, as opposed to a Tales of the Reaching Moon publication.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and so we're hoping to have that ready for Chaosium Con on April 8th and 9th, and there'll be an inaugural edition of the Meints Index of Glorantha there, and have it on sale.
Awesome. Well, we will be there for that. We're looking forward to it.
Yeah.
So to kind of bring this interview, kind of wrap it up, I thought it would be interesting to end talking a bit about Greg. And so Evan, I'll take the first question if you want to take the second one. So one thing that I've always loved about this world is the phrase, your Glorantha will vary, or your Glorantha may vary, depending on which form of the phrase you are using. So it as the president of Chaosium, as a fan, a longtime fan of this world, what does that phrase mean to you? Like, if you could share that, like to you, what does your Glorantha may vary for our fans who are maybe new to this world, new to playing, new to running in this world? Yeah.
Well, I think back to my D&D days when I got the wonderful map set for the World of Greyhawk, you know, in that kind of binder folio.
The folio edition, yeah.
And with D&D, I never really felt any kind of ownership to really change certain things or have a say in anything in the game. It was just whatever they published, I consumed it, and that was it. And played through a lot of wonderful modules like the, you know, the Giant series and the Drow series, and loved all that at the time. But with Glorantha, you felt like you could have your own stories to tell and your own adventures, and things were much more under your control creatively. And it was encouraged far more than I ever felt with other games that I played. And because it had myths that became reality and reality that became myths, there was always that you got to tell the next sentence or chapter of the story yourself. And so, yeah, Glorantha will vary or may vary. There's no right or wrong answer to it. It all depends on your comfort with adding your own stories to it. It's not required. That's why it may vary. But for those of you that want it to, yeah, it will vary. And that's all good. You know, so many people have written Gloranthan publications, that, you can fill a 260-page book with them.
Mm-hmm.
And the lists go dozens and dozens of pages. That, to me, that's the wonderful thing about it. It's not just one person or even one company's story to tell, even though we're the largest publisher of the material
Right.
and all that. And it is, not to be all legal about it, it's our intellectual property, which we love dearly. But we're very happy letting everybody contribute to it and making it a little bit or a lot of it their own.
Very cool.
Well, and I get the coolest question. It's also the most personal, and we appreciate, we talked about this when we talked to you before, but you had a personal relationship with Greg Stafford, the first president of Chaosium. He discovered Glorantha and he gave it as a gift to, it's beloved worldwide, from Finland to Japan to Australia, back to us. And I know with a personal relationship, you can't have just one memory that you would want to share that is the best. But if you could, we don't have Greg anymore, but we have all of his legacy. What's something that you remember from your many interactions with him that would be helpful to understand Glorantha, that's a favorite memory of yours in your relationship with him?
My kids remind me all the time. And the way they remind me all the time is they'll say, "You're kind of doing the charisma 18 thing." Or I'm making a charisma check, because a lot of people who know Greg, if you ever use the phrase Greg had an 18 charisma, nobody disagrees with you. He was just one of those people who you wanted to listen to him. You wanted to share things with him. He was very personable. And part of that was that he was very interested in other people. And that includes my kids, who got to know Greg, because we were fortunate that, especially before Gen Con, he would stay at our house in what we now call the Stafford suite, his bedroom, so to speak. And while he was there, he got to know my kids. And, one time, because one of them was starting to collect stamps, Greg sent them a bunch of stamps that he had collected when he was a kid. And he wanted to share his life and also be a part of your life. And so, yeah, he had a natural 18 charisma that just, so many people have such great stories to tell about Greg. And, with me, like, I had the one where he called me an Issaries merchant when I was working in the booth. Mm-hmm. That's one example. My wife would say it's when he used to take an hour or two every time before Gen Con and help sort out the fish tank in our house, because Greg worked in a fish store for a little while, and he had a huge lifelong interest in fish, and he had a whole series of fish tanks in his house. And that was his connection with my wife, who didn't know anything about Glorantha, didn't know anything about gaming, but they just connected on that level and had a very pleasant afternoon every, pre-Gen Con. And so somebody that had such a natural gift to connect with people, it was just wonderful that I got to have a whole series of these things from basically 1994 up until about a month or so before he died, and even closer to that, when we would talk on the phone. And, we always thought there was time to do more things in the future. And we did a lot of things that were full of great memories. But yeah, I don't know how else to describe him. Then he was just such a charismatic individual that, a lot of great memories with everybody who encountered him.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for sharing that, and for sharing all of your experiences and knowledge about Glorantha. I hope that, this helps our audience connect too. I mean, that, again, you can be president of Chaosium and only have 10 or 20% in Glorantha knowledge, and have all of the world to explore and enjoy.
And my Cthulhu Mythos skill is probably about 10% too.
That's probably why you're so sane.
Every now and then.
Yeah. Well, Rick, again,
I just wanted to say thank you. I love talking about Chaosium, and I love your guys' show, and I'm really glad you let me be on it and share a few of my stories and ramble on a little bit. Hopefully not too much.
Oh, no.
No, my pleasure to be here, and I hope you guys invite me back years later saying, hey, remember 3 years ago on episode, that was like 100 episodes ago.
Well, I appreciate that. I was going to say
You guys all
thanks for joining us on this, and this has just been a wonderful experience getting to talk with you both before the show and then on this one. And we're looking forward to coming to Chaosium Con and hanging out and just seeing everything. And yes, we would love to have you back on the show. We're doing elder races right now, and so the ducks are on the horizon. Maybe we'll see if we can't schedule to have you as a co-host for our duck episode.
Tell you more Greg Stafford and duck stories.
That would be great.
Sure.
All right, well, that does it for this very special interview with Rick Meints of Chaosium. If you like what we do, please consider subscribing to the YouTube channel or joining us on Patreon. You can find us at Patreon/Iconic Production. We will be back in the third week of February to discuss the dwarves, the Mustali, the dwarves of Glorantha. I'm really looking forward to doing that episode with you, Evan. So until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming, and we will be back in February for more Exploring Glorantha.